Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Radious Total War in Warhammer 3, Immortal Empires. I suppose it is inevitable that if you're going to talk about SFO, people are going to come out of the woodwork to ask you to talk about Radious as well. Well, I do have a lot of opinions on the subject. I've played with both SFO and Radious several times in Warhammer 3. Now, generally I play with the vanilla game because that's what most people are interested in actually watching, except a couple of videos here and there talking about the subject. But I do admit that I do like Radious overall far more so than I like SFO. In certain respects. In other respects, I do think SFO is far ahead. So let's take a look at a situation and what you're going to get with Radious. First off, there are a lot of units added at every single tier. For some races, more than others. So if you look at the Cafaean roster, we have our basic barracks chain, we have our artillery chain, cavalry chain, and then we have garrisons, and a lot of different units at higher tiers, like Frontier Guards, Onyx Dragons, etc., Sworn Gatekeepers, etc. So we do have, there's a lot of stuff, to the point that people accuse this mod of being bloatware, basically. Like, it has a lot of freaking things in it, and a lot of them can certainly end up being meaningless. I'm not sure I quite agree with that. I do agree there's a lot of shit in it, and not necessarily all of it is worth it, but you gotta keep in mind one thing about Warhammer 3 campaigns. It is not a great dynamic to play a campaign over and over again, start it over and over again, and always use the same units over and over again and not have really a lot of variety until much later on in the campaign when it's pretty much over. So having different types of infantry, range units, cavalry units available at every tier does actually add that kind of diversity. I would probably recommend quite firmly using something like a Warband upgrade mod. There is one for Radious, because otherwise you're going to be recruiting units, then disposing them, recruiting more. I mean, especially if you're looking at something like the Empire. Holy Jesus. Like, I understand modders like to make units, but this seems a bit excessive, even for me. Mind you, I've seen pictures of people who had mods that had even more units, but yeah, that's multiple mods. Radious is crazy in respect to that. But keep in mind, not all of these units are relevant at every tier. Like, for instance, if we look at Cafe, you are going to recruit the peasants maybe very early on, then you're going to switch to the Fearless Wall, and then eventually you're going to switch to mass production Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen. I think this is actually better than the vanilla campaign experience for Cafe, because in a vanilla campaign experience, you're just recruiting Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen. There's very little incentive to recruit anything else. Except Peasant Archers if you can't recruit Jade Warrior Crossbowmen, and maybe some Iron Hail Gunners and Grenadiers. So that is something to be said about it. On top of that, I do think that they are really helping certain races. Like, look at Bretonnia. Consider Bretonnia a vanilla game. They're a cavalry-focused race, so their cavalry is the main important aspect of the race. They're still a cavalry-focused race in Radius, but they also have a lot of infantry options and range options. These are not the best in the game. They will be beaten soundly by factions dedicated to that, but at least it gives them options to deal with various issues. And oh, look at this Mountain Knights. Imagine if we could actually get that creative assembly. Wouldn't that be freaking awesome? So, just saying, it does help fill the gaps. I understand that there's an accusation made on the subject, oh, it makes all races feel very samey. I'm gonna disagree with that. Cafe still feel like Cafe. Skaven still feel like Skaven. And they still have those kind of strengths and weaknesses available to them. Like, I've played Khazors, I've played Cafe, I've played Kislev. It is still that kind of campaign experience for those races, and still kind of that battle experience as well. Because the units they added, while they may help fill some gaps, you're still going to want to focus on what your race is actually good at. For Cafe, it's range units. For the Skaven, it's artillery and sneaky boys or range units. It depends on which Skaven Legendary Lord you're playing as. So I do think, from that perspective, it works out. From a battle perspective, what do I think about the actual battles themselves? Well, here's a comparison I'd make between Vanilla, SFO, and Radius. In Vanilla, it's all about balance of power. So if you are fighting a battle in the Vanilla game, you want to ensure you have more strength than an enemy, because you need to swing that balance of power in your favor in order to cause the enemy army to rout. So effectively, what Vanilla battles end up feeling like, you're either fighting to the death or you're routing the enemy. There is kind of no in between on that. There is some recovery that can happen in battles, especially larger ones, but for the most part, that's how vanilla battles are going to play out. You clash against the enemy, try and maximize your damage against them, and then you hopefully route them, because otherwise you're going to have a bloodbath on your hands. In SFO, you're not going to really be able to route them in many situations, regardless of the kind of difficulty you're talking about. And this is thinking about like AI stats modifier on neutral. Keep that in mind. In Radius, from my experience, what will more often than not happen, at least in field battles, we'll get into sieges in just a moment, but what will happen more often than not in field battles is the enemy will rout, then they'll rally. Now, I'm not sure if this is because of the Radius balancing or because Radius in itself is fucking crazy with the number of armies it can have. Though, to be honest, this may not be on the default settings of Radius, because I did install a submod that increases the upkeep of units by, 60%? But the armies inherently of Radius that you and AI will recruit will be gigantic. Like, you'll have full army stacks, and a regular campaign might see you facing off 3 armies at once with 3 of your own. Or at least 2, because that's kind of the limit. That is a more common occurrence. So I'm not sure if it's because of the scale of battles that units are rolling back and forth, or because of the way this balance is handled. But regardless, that has been my experience in field battles. The one downside, and a major freaking one of that, is that Radius has a love of sieges, because just like SFO loves to appeal to a certain demographic of people who think that slow equals strategic equal good, so does Radius in its own way. Different way, and I do think it's generally better. See, SFO is very fucking slow in everything. Radius is not slow. It's not necessarily faster, though. But you do have a ton of resources. Problem is, you have a lot of fucking sieges. Because the garrisons, the default garrisons of settlements can be, well, they can be reasonable, but they can be very quickly buffed as well in settlements. Like, especially when you consider that you can recruit certain units from garrison buildings, and there's quite a few settlements that do start with that garrison building, you kind of start understanding exactly what's going to happen in a campaign if you're playing with Radius. So you're going to have a lot of fucking siege battles, which suck. And that's not even a problem of any particular mod. I don't care how you feel about SFO or Radius. Like, sieges are creative assemblies fuck up. So you do have to deal with that disaster, and I think it is a really bad campaign design to push the player into fighting a lot of sieges. But that is the idea. My recommendation? Get a mod that removes them completely. The auto-resolve that you do have in sieges does tend to feel pretty decent for the most part. Or the kind of auto-resolve that you do have does feel to be pretty decent overall. Yes, you might have situations like this where you might take a lot of casualties, but a lot of the times it does feel reasonable. In fact, it kind of feels like one of the more reasonable auto-resolves that you do have. I don't know. Like, I think SFO can be good sometimes, can be ridiculous. I do think Radius is the best out of the bunch in that respect. But mind you, I did focus on campaigns that did explicitly have units with a lot of fucking high armor. So keep that in mind how auto-resolve does work inherently. But yeah, I would get a mod that just flat out remove sieges and just fight the field battles. I think they can be pretty decent enough as they are, and I think the field battles do work. And I think it's also fun to have a good amount of early game unit variety, have a lot of armies, have a lot of resources, and how you use those resources. That is one of the key selling points as far as I see it with Radius. Except that sieges suck. So, you know, if not for the fact that they made garrisons stronger and thus ruined their entire game plan, I would say this is great, but they did. And I don't think there's a way to remove those buffed up garrisons, or I haven't seen a way, personally. So I do want garrisons to work inherently differently in Total War. I think the idea of having a garrison that's stronger than an army, an actual army that you spend a lot of fucking resources on, just because you built a building that's cheaper than an army, is plainly fucking ridiculous. That is my stance on the subject. And I certainly don't think garrisons should be inherently strong just because you have a provincial capital at a certain level. That is my perspective on the subject. That's what I'm going to stick at. Okay, so sieges and battles aside, what about campaign pacing, campaign resources? Well, like with many other mods, Radius does tend to go down the path of someone nerfing your economy. It's not as much, and in some cases there's even buffs to your economy, but the real winner is not so much the money you're making, it's the money you're saving. So you might not make a fortune of money, but you will have very low upkeep. Even with submods for Radius that do increase the upkeep, it's still generally going to be far lower upkeep than the base game. Mind you, I've stated this before, I'll say again, if you're playing a cafe campaign in vanilla, you can maintain just as many armies as this, and yes, of Jade fucking warriors and halberds, crossbowmen, and all that. I've done it many freaking times in the vanilla cafe experience. So it kind of feels similar if you're using like 60% upkeep submod. At least that's been my perspective. But again, it may depend on a race. You may want to use the campaign customization mod to change some of those numbers around as opposed to just relying on Radius submods, but that's where I stand on that subject. So you do have a lot of resources. Structures are not necessarily the cheapest in the world, though it depends on a race-by-race basis. Some of the higher tier stuff can be real expensive. Some of the, generally speaking, the lower tier stuff is very fucking cheap. The higher tier stuff is really fucking expensive. Reminds me of how the greenskins worked, because that's how greenskins worked before Omens of Destruction, and still kind of do. In the sense that their lower tier stuff was very fucking cheap, so you can mass it, and their higher tier stuff was pretty damn expensive. I mean, you could afford it by the time you got there, but it was just something worth considering with regards to how you planned your greenskin campaign. One of the things I do dislike, though, about Radius significantly is the way they handle control. So, you do still have the difficulty level modifier. SFO had the wisdom to remove this. Please remove it. Like, if there's anything I would say to anyone that's looking to play Radius, fucking remove the difficulty level modifier. You're going to end up suffering quite a bit for it. But that's one stupidity that you can also lay at the feet of CAC. All the problems, many of the problems or some of the problems they can say that exist with Radius beyond bloatware accusations are things that exist in the vanilla game as well. Though they are kind of worsened, the sieges are kind of worsened because you have so freaking many of them, some massive garrisons, and you also have the problem control. So, you still have the difficulty level modifier, and what's worse is that unlike the vanilla game, if your control is low, it's not going to go up, it's going to go down. And so will your growth go down. So you're losing growth, but you're also losing control. You're not suffering a massive economic penalty in the same way that SFO puts you through. Like, yeah, your income is going to be shit if you don't have it in control. So you can imagine it. But welcome back to the Warhammer 1, Warhammer 2 Rebellion Tournament, where every single turn a rebellion is going to take place. Where will it be now? Is it going to be in the Forest of the Moon? Is it going to be in the Warp Sword Desert? Or who knows, maybe Pomei will rise up and overthrow Miao Ying. Stay tuned. Seriously, that's how it feels playing a campaign of Radius. Constant fucking rebellions in the game, constant management of provinces, constant building of control structures in order to keep it in check, or just recruiting cheap shit armies in order to deal with them very quickly. It is not fine dynamic. Creative Assembly moved from it for a reason, and I wish that Radius had done so as well. On the flip side, if you do manage to stabilize control in a province, you're going to be in a much better situation. And you do have a lot of tools, because you do get more skill points with lords and heroes, so you can actually invest in the control tree. Jesus. Like, seriously, if that's how... I really hope that Creative Assembly is not taking notes from Radius or SFO with regards to how to rework their control systems, because both SFO and Radius are pretty fucking shit at. It's very easy to handle this. There is a mod that removes the difficulty order penalty. I'm gonna link it in the description, install that, and you might want to use campaign customization to also give yourself a boost of control. How much depends on the race you're playing. For Cafe, I'd probably say a 5 bonus, because it's not just the control that you have by default, or the one you can manage with buildings and heroes, it's also the control you lose when you confederate other factions. Yay! -8 control when you confederate the faction. Coming right up. Yeah. It feels like trying to order an ice cream at McDonald's and the ice cream machine is inherently broken, because that's just how McDonald's roll. Deal with it. Seriously. Like, I swear there's an unwritten rule with every single major mod overhaul that they have to be obnoxious in some fucking way or another, even when they do a lot of things well. But I do like the pacing of the campaign. I do like that I have a lot of different options. I do like that I have a lot of money to spend. I have lower upkeep. I can maintain a lot of armies. I can have dynamic campaign flexibility, but I really despise dealing with the control of provinces. And I do despise being forced into sieges. So if you're the kind of guy who loves dealing with constant rebellions and sieges, this might be the perfect mod for you. If not, just mod it out. Surprisingly, it works quite well. That's all I would say on the subject. I mean, yeah, it has a lot of units. It has a lot of stuff. Some of it is pointless later on, but again, the units you want to recruit are the units that at the tier you're at, and that's, I think, one of the great things, is like you always have something relevant at the tier you're getting at, as opposed to certain campaigns where a lot of the fun shit is later on and you're never going to use it in a campaign because the campaign's pretty much over. Or campaigns where you do have a lot of units early on, but then you don't really have something later on. Consider the Dark Elf situation. So I think that's one of the good things. And then to further accusations of bloatware, Jesus, like I swear, look at these faction effects, holy shit. Like, is there a rule for Radius that they have to have a certain number of faction effects or they're not going to work on the mod anymore? Like, sweet lord. Now, it's a lot of stuff, right, but it's fluff. It's mostly fluff, to be honest, because, yeah, sometimes it is significant, but I would say, like, between a comparison of mods, like SFO versus Radius does a lot better job at differentiating the campaigns within a race, and let alone the different races in the game, and making them feel very unique. Not necessarily in the best way possible, but it does freaking happen. Radius just has a lot of shit. It can lead to a different campaign experience, but I swear to God, like, no one's gonna remember half of these fucking faction effects, and many of these don't even matter, really. Like, who cares about cargo value in a Cathayan campaign? Do you know why you send caravans in a Cathayan campaign? It's not for the fucking money, because it's not enough, and you have plenty of money elsewhere, and it does cost you, and you're kind of paying a bigger price to actually send the caravan. You're sending it to trade for items, really, and maybe get into a couple of fights. Seriously. It is more worthwhile to send a caravan to deliberately fight certain people, including spawned armies, than it is worthwhile to actually reach the destination. Because it takes a long time to get there, and yes, you will make more money than you spent, but you have to spend all that at once, then you have to wait a couple of turns. Still, can be a nice boost of money, but yeah, don't rely on caravans in a campaign for that. So cargo capacity and sell value of cargo, whatever. Hero recruit rank for Astromancer sounds great until you realize you can get very high hero recruit rank for Astromancers anyway at Cathay. So yay! Construction costs for the Great Bastion? What, am I struggling for money in a Cathayan campaign? Leadership against Warriors of Chaos and Demons of Chaos, Chaos Dwarves and Norska. Yeah, because Cathay really does struggle with leadership, I know. It's a really difficult process. Defensive supplies, because fighting defensive sieges is really what I want to do in my campaign. So my point is, a lot of these faction effects end up being fluff. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're worth other times they do just feel like pure fluff. And they don't have the uniqueness of special skill lines or lord effects in the same way that SFO does. So yeah, from that perspective, SFO is much better. But from a practical campaign experience turn by turn, I gotta say, these 23 turns have been inherently more interesting than what I would do in 23 turns in any fucking SFO campaign, even if I customize it. Or a vanilla campaign. Or some vanilla campaigns would do better, but keep in mind, I'm talking about Cathay here. They're not exactly swimming in glory right now in the vanilla game of Warhammer 3. And I do absolutely like that you do have, say for instance, more unit capacity inherently as the Chaos Dwarves, more armies available if you're, say, playing the Tomb Kings, unit capacity and all that. What I feel about Radius in conclusion is, yes, there are things like removing sieges, improving control, etc. Maybe even giving your lords and heroes some instant recruit rank, and maybe going with some faster construction and growth, just so you can have access to that higher tier stuff, suites with higher tier stuff faster, and actually use it, because campaign pacing is going to be fast, just as it is in vanilla. That's, again, not an issue with any mod, SFO or Radius or anything like that. It's just the way the vanilla campaign works, and no mod solves that, regardless of what people might feel on that subject. So you might want some faster construction and some growth, maybe. Though maybe keep the costs as they are. Have to make those financial choices. Have a lot of money, but have to spend it. That's probably a much better campaign experience than what other mods do have on offer. But that's my perspective on it. So there are issues, but I think inherently it actually approaches the game in a far more fucking sensical manner and practical manner, in a way that's good than what SFO does. It does, however, have a lot of bloat. I'm not gonna lie on that. Not necessarily in the units, but in the faction effects. Jesus. Oh boy. You gotta say, like, that team is dedicated to really putting in as much stuff as humanly possible in a campaign. And mind you, I gotta say, I do like Radius for Warhammer 3, but that's kind of the only game I would say that for. I have played it in Troy. I did not appreciate it, for instance. Yes, I keep mentioning Troy. I actually like that game in a lot of ways. I think it created a lot of great ideas that will define Total War in the future in a really good way. Make it that way well. Christine, signing up. Stay tuned for more. And remember, just some campaign customization, growth, construction costs, maybe removal of sieges, controlled benefits. That will help you out. I'll link some mods in the description. Stay tuned.